Hello and welcome to this video. My name's Beckham. Thanks for watching. What is it that makes a good YouTube video? Now, I don't know about you, but I find it quite hard to determine what that special something is, but I tend to know it when I see it. Now, I think technical videos are okay at times, but I'd like to try to include some entertainment value too. But don't worry, I'm not going to break into song or start telling jokes. So some feedback on if I'm managing to do that would be helpful, or suggestions of what you want to see less of and perhaps what you want to see more of. I hope you'll agree that this is a fairly impressive image, but it wasn't taken by what most of us would consider to be a photographer. I think the taking and manipulation of this image may be of interest for a number of reasons. Now, the image is greatly helped by the subject and the lighting, but it's also a panoramic image with a completed size of around 9,200 pixels by 5,200 pixels, and that's the equivalent of something like a 48 megapixel image. And if you haven't already guessed it by now, it's also a drone shot from a Mavic Pro drone that records images around 12 megapixel. Now, my son took these images, and as I've said, he's not a photographer, but he does know one, me. I made some suggestions to him regarding how he could squeeze more quality from the 12 megapixel images that his drone was shooting by taking a number of shots and creating a panorama. Although the drone software will create a pano automatically, I suggested a manual set of images would be a better option. Firstly, the images could be shot in RAW mode and then stitched together in Photoshop. And one of the benefits of that is that Photoshop will stitch the raw images together and retain all the flexibility of RAW shooting. Photoshop also allows other great editing benefits like content-aware fill when it's required, and it often is with panoramic shots. So the pictures need to be taken in portrait mode. Now, drones are very stable in flight, so it's not hard to frame up the image you wish to take. Start at the left, take a shot, turn the drone and take another, and so on. When you've got your content covered, you tilt the lens down and you work your way backwards. One shot, move the drone to the left, another shot. As you can see, we build up a whole series of images, as we can see here, 18 of them in all. Now, although my son isn't a photographer, he seems pretty comfortable with the drone controls, and he didn't seem to have too much difficulty shooting the images. Now, I know this because he shot quite a number of other panos using exactly the same methods over the past few weeks, and I've been able to stitch all of them successfully for him. And here is another of those examples, and I suppose we could call these multiple stitched images rather than panoramic, because they're not exactly long and thin. The image here is fitting nicely into the 16:9 format. The stitching of multiple raw images in Photoshop is really quick and easy to do these days, and the best part of the process, I think, is the fact that these days we can start with raw files, stitch them together, and we end up with all the benefits of that raw image. Photoshop also allows us to easily make those small final tweaks that just put the icing on the cake when we're producing our images. What we have with these images as well is the perfect subject and great quality to be able to create a large canvas wrap. I've already created a video on preparing images like this for a canvas wrap, so if you're watching on YouTube, I'll link to that video below. But you can also find it on the miscellaneous section of our Photoshop menu on the website if you'd rather download the video rather than just view it on YouTube. So I think we need to make a start. We have 18 raw images, and this is the image we're going to create. As you can see here, I've opened up Photoshop's bridge. You can see the 18 images we're going to use somewhere in the middle of the screen here, but they're mixed in with many other images, even a few infrareds down the bottom. What we can do with our panoramic or our stitched images is to make them into a stack. It does tidy up things quite a bit. To do that, all I need to do is to identify the series of images. I'll highlight the first, hold my Shift key, and highlight the last, and all of those in between will be selected. I can right click on any one of these now, and here I've got an option to stack them together. I'm just going to choose group as a stack, but you can see we can auto stack panorama or HDR images from a much larger group of images than we have here. But I'll just go to group as a stack, and once they're grouped we can ungroup from here. We just come back to the same place. Now you can see what Photoshop does, or Photoshop's bridge does. It places all 18 files in a stack. We can press the play button and we get a quick flick through all of the images should we need a little refresher what's in there. Anytime we want to open them up and see them again, we just click the little number tab top left and they all open up. What we need to do is to get them into Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm going to need to reselect them. I'll select the first once again, hold the Shift key and select the last, hit the Enter key, and all of those will open up into Adobe Camera Raw. Once we have all 18 images, and you can see we've got a scroll bar here to view them all, but in actual fact I don't think we need to view them at all. All we need to do is to hit Control A, the shortcut keys, to select all 18 of those thumbnails, and from the little option right at the top right of the film strip we're going to select Merge to Panorama. I'm going to allow Photoshop to work in real time so you can see just how long it's going to take to stitch all of these images together. As you can see, not very much time at all, although I was just about to say it's not quite finished when it did. Now we get one or two options over on the right hand side, but I'd like to draw your attention to a little message right up at the top right of this Panorama Merge preview. It says that 3 of the 18 images were unable to be merged. Now I'm not sure entirely what's gone wrong there, but isn't it good that we've still got an acceptable result, even though Photoshop or Bridge or Adobe Camera Raw has eliminated 3 images that it couldn't stitch together. Let's take a look at the options we have just below that message under the heading of Projection. The default setting is spherical. Ignore the outer edge of the image just for a moment. We can select cylindrical and we're going to get a slightly different shape. Now if our intention with a higher resolution stitch like this is to make one of those lovely canvas wraps for the wall, then perhaps we can use this option to change the shape of the image, because this may fit the space we want to occupy. On this particular occasion though, I'm going to go for the spherical, but I just want to try the perspective too. Most of the time when I try this I get a little bit of a problem. Let's see just how Photoshop copes with this. I suspect it's not going to work, and it didn't, as you can hear. Let me get rid of that and I'll go back to my spherical option. Ignore the boundary warp just a moment, because that's really connected with auto crop. If I just move it you can see exactly what it does. Sometimes I don't like to do this or use the auto crop. It rather depends on how all of the images are stitched together, but sometimes I like to use content aware fill in Photoshop to fill in some troublesome areas. Here we don't have too many of those, and I suppose we could choose to use auto crop. But I tell you what, let's not do that, and it gives me the opportunity to demonstrate just how good content aware fill is. We also have the opportunity to apply automatic settings. These are editing changes to the image, and if I tick that, you'll see the image brighten up. Do we tick that or not? It really doesn't make a great deal of difference because we're working on a raw file, or we will be in a few moments. So whether we start from what Photoshop considers to be a good point and we make changes from there, or we untick and make all the changes ourselves, I think that's going to be a personal choice. Let's go with the auto settings, and I'm going to click merge. Straight away we're offered the opportunity to save a name, and it gives us a default name, and to be honest, most of the time I've just left it at that. So I'm going to click save, and if you quickly look down at the bottom left of the screen, you can see that Photoshop did that pretty quickly, and there we have the stitched image, or the thumbnail, down at the bottom of the film strip. Now, given that we tick the box to make automatic changes, if we look over to the extreme right hand side, we can see a number of these sliders have been moved off center. Now, I'm looking at the image and I'm very happy with it. I think I'd like to bring the exposure down just a little bit. Maybe the image is a little bit too bright for my liking, so a little bit down to something like that. I'd also like to make a little more of the beach color and the rocks on the headland. Now, to do that without affecting the greens and the blues, I'm going to go up to my hue, saturation and luminance adjustments. Selecting saturation, I'm going to push up the orange and maybe even the yellow as well, and you can see I've made quite a bit of those nice warm colors on the headland, which tend to go quite nicely with the cooler greens and blues. Maybe I've overdone that a little bit. Let's just back off a little bit. Once again, always we're going to have personal choices here. Let's go back to the basic tab. Now, I think those automatic settings plus a little reduction in the exposure and a warming up or a increase in color in the yellows there is just about finishing the job. But there is one or two sliders I like to try. I do like to inject a little bit of clarity. That often gives a sparkle that I quite like. And I'm also looking at the top right of the sky. The sky is a nice shade of blue, but you can see the top right corner is a little bit weaker than perhaps the top left. So maybe I could deal with that with the gradient tool. So let's have a look at that. Let's select the gradient from the top of the screen, and I just want to click and drag. You can see the green dot shows the start and the red dot the end, and I'm just moving it around there. Now, it's picked up some changes from the last time this was used, so I'll just double click the blacks and also the exposure, and just so you can see what's happening here a little clearer, I'm going to touch the V key. It just hides that selection, but it's still there working. So what I can do now is perhaps tweak down that top right corner. Maybe I'll just reduce the temperature a bit to try to balance the sky nicely, just to hold that top right corner. It was a small point, but I think worth the effort. I'm also looking at the horizon, which looks fairly straight to me, but if it wasn't, I would probably fix that in Photoshop anyway. Now at this point I'm going to open this up because we need to look at what work we need to do around the edge of this image, but before we do that we want to look at the composition. So I'm going to open this up. You notice that my button here says Open Object. Down at the bottom center of the screen there's a little underlined string of text. When we click that, we do get the opportunity to tick a little box which will remain ticked until you decide to untick it. So we can open in Photoshop the images as smart objects, which means we can come back instantly should we wish to make a change. Now I think there's not much chance of that, but nevertheless I always have this set, so I'm not going to change my favourite settings. I'm going to click to open this up into the main window of Photoshop. Now once we've got the image opened up in Photoshop, we can see evidence that we're working with a smart object by the little icon at the bottom right corner of the thumbnail. That allows me to jump back into Adobe Camera Raw at any time with a double click of the thumbnail, make changes, and to bring the image back with those changes in place into Photoshop quickly and easily and without any loss of quality, because we're working with a raw file. Now we're going to start using our content aware fill in a few seconds, and we can't do that while this is a smart object, so we need to remove the smart object status. To do that, go to the right of the thumbnail, right click and choose rasterize layer. Now one of the reasons why I don't like to crop in Camera Raw, and it is just a personal view really, is I like to take a look at it here before I decide on what I'm going to lose or what I need to repair. So I'm going to pick up my crop tool from the toolbox, just click into the picture. Now the composition looks pretty good here. I've got a strong point on that vertical on the left and where those two cross, and that's nicely on the headland. I could get that a bit sweeter if I bring in my crop from the right. I could possibly bring down the sky just a little bit so that the upper horizontal line is a little bit closer to that edge, and I think that's close enough. We don't have to have absolute perfection. But I've got quite a large area on the left hand side. I would have to build up with content aware fill. Can it handle it? Well, let's hit the enter key here to commit the crop, and we'll find out. We need to start by telling Photoshop which part of the image it needs to repair first, and to do that we need to use a selection. It doesn't really matter which selection tool you use. I'm going to use my polygonal lasso because it's convenient for this. So I'm going to click just at the top left of the image and select down, off the corner, back up to join up with my selection. Then I need to go to my edit menu, top left of the screen, and choose content aware fill. Now the green area on the left is the part of the image that Photoshop is using to make the repair and show us the repair on the right. Now you can see it's doing a pretty good job without any help from me. If I did need to help things along, I do have the opportunity via the brushes at the top left. If I select the brush, you can see at the top of the screen I've got a minus and a plus. So I could remove parts of this green area if the repair wasn't so good. But in actual fact, I don't think we can fault it. So all I'm going to do here is down to the right hand side and click OK to open this up into Photoshop. I can now use Ctrl D to remove that selection. You'll notice that Photoshop has created the repair on a new layer. It's created the layer for us. So I can click the little eye to turn it off and back on. And I suppose we've always got the opportunity here to make changes via some of the other tools if it was necessary to do so. But here it looks pretty good. So I need to choose another area to fix, and I think I'll go down at the bottom section of the image next, but I do need to remember to select the main image, not the layer that's been created, because there's not enough pixels there for it to sample from. But I can now go back to exactly the same tool, and I can do the same again along the bottom, and in fact we may even be able to speed this up a little bit, because I think this section is going to be fairly easy for Photoshop. So I'm going to hit Shift and F5, which brings up our fill window. You'll notice in the contents there's already content aware selected. Once we select that from the drop down menu, that will stay there until we change it. So I can either click the OK button or just touch the Enter key and allow Photoshop to have a go at that bottom section. Not going to take long, and I think it's going to do a pretty good job, so I'll get ready with that Control D, and there you can see it looks pretty good. Maybe there's a touch or two down at the bottom right I may wish to make, but I want to have a go at that bottom right corner anyway, so we'll come back to that in a moment. And you'll notice this time, doing it with the Shift F5, that it hasn't created the new layer. So with my Pano selected here, and I've got my polygonal lasso tool still selected too, I'll just draw a selection down here, around and up to the top. Once again, I don't think it's going to have too many problems here, so I'm going to go the shortcut route of Shift F5 Enter, and I'll get ready with my Control D to remove the selection, and that looks pretty good to me. So while things are working so well, let me have a look at that bottom corner. These are just little bits of highlight which I think have been caught by the sunlight on the wind on the water. So I'm going to use exactly the same method here. We could go back to the edit menu, but I think Photoshop is going to manage this with its Shift F5 and Enter. I'll zoom in once I've removed that selection, but I think we've done a pretty good job here. Now what I'd like to do next is just have a go at the highlights here. You can see little speckles where the sunlight is being caught on the water. I'm going to deal with those, but I think what I'll do first of all is to select both of the layers on the right hand side, right click and choose Merge, but then I'll add a new blank layer above my image. Now the only reason I'm doing this is so that I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to deal with all these highlights. Once I've done that, I'll be able to come back and I can turn the layer on and off, and you can appreciate the difference it makes when we take the time to fix them. Now the spinning round of the screen indicates that I've fixed all those little highlights, and because I put that new blank layer in place, I can turn it on and off and show you the difference it makes, which is quite considerable, and often we underestimate just how much damage highlights do to our image. And of course it's a fail-safe. As long as we've done a good job, at some stage we can select both layers, right click, and I can choose to merge them again, and I'll hit Control 0 to fit the image on screen. Now I think the image could do with a bit of a vignette around the edges and the corners. To do that, I'm going to use an adjustment layer. So the adjustment layer is down at the bottom of the layers palette. I'm going to click to select it, and from the options I've got, I'm going to choose levels, and what I'd like to do here is just tweak down the mid-tone just to take this down a little bit darker. Something around there should do it quite well. Now what I'd like to do now is to select a brush, because I'm going to be spraying or painting black onto this mask so that I can lighten the center of the image, bring it back to how we had it a few moments ago. But because I've got a mask and an adjustment layer, I have ultimate control here. So let me go over to the other side and pick up a soft edge brush. I'm going to use just a basic brush from my toolbox. I do want a big brush, something like that, and I need to be painting black, and black is the foreground color in my color picker. And on top of that, I do want to make sure that the flow rate up at the top is quite low, because now I can start painting in the center and you can see my image brightening. So I've got the control here. I can just do this in a very delicate fashion. I can choose to add a little bit more black to those areas which are dark. I could control the vignette that I want perfectly, and we can see what we've done in the mask at the top right. Now it's always a good idea to save the image with the adjustment layer and the mask, at least for a day or two, because if you come back to your image tomorrow and realize you want to make a change while you've got these two layers, it's very easy. But at some stage I'm going to select both my layers and I'm going to right click and flatten the image to finish. So to bring this video to a close, let's take a look at the image full screen or thereabouts. Remember too that if you're watching my video on YouTube, please consider subscribing to my channel and hit the notification bell so you'll be informed whenever I put up new content. Remember as well that down below I'm going to include a link to another video where we dealt with creating the artwork for a canvas wrap, which is particularly relevant with this type of image. And if you'd like to come to our website, the address you can see on screen, you can actually download this video onto your desktop should you wish to keep it. Thanks for watching.